Captain Daniel Reyes sat in the cockpit of his small scout ship, staring out at the vast expanse of stars. His mission was simple: map the uncharted regions of the galaxy. He had been flying for days, passing through countless systems, some empty, some with strange planets and civilizations. His heart raced with excitement, knowing that his journey could uncover something truly extraordinary. Yet nothing could prepare him for what lay ahead. The scanner beeped, a soft, rhythmic sound. Daniel glanced down at the screen. A small, unknown planet flickered into view. It was located in the distant corner of the galaxy, far from any known civilizations. There was nothing particularly special about it at first glance, but something about the way the planet shimmered intrigued him. His curiosity took over, and he set a course for it. As he descended into the atmosphere, Daniel was struck by how quiet everything seemed. The planet, Kora, was covered in dense forests and winding rivers, with large cities hidden beneath thick layers of greenery. There was no sign of advanced technology, and the landscape was calm, almost peaceful. Yet, as he approached the surface, he could see the decay of once great cities. Towering structures that had once reached for the sky were now crumbling, overtaken by nature. He landed in a small clearing near what seemed to be an old city center. Daniel unstrapped himself from his seat, grabbed his gear, and stepped outside. The air was cool, and the faint smell of ancient wood filled his lungs. His boots crunched on the soft earth as he made his way towards the ruined buildings. A voice called out from behind him, soft but clear, "You're not supposed to be here." Daniel turned to see a woman standing at the edge of the trees. Her skin was a deep shade of green, and her eyes glowed with an otherworldly light. She was tall and thin, wearing clothes made from some kind of plant-based material. She looked like she had just stepped out of a storybook, a mysterious figure from another time. But there was something in her expression, sadness, perhaps, that caught his attention more than her appearance. "I'm sorry," Daniel said, raising his hands in a gesture of peace. "I didn't mean to intrude. I'm just exploring. I didn't know anyone was here." The woman studied him carefully for a moment, her eyes narrowing. "Not many come here anymore. Most have forgotten this place." Daniel's heart skipped a beat. "Forgotten? What do you mean?" She sighed, a deep, heavy sigh. "We were once part of a great alliance of civilizations. Many galaxies knew of us. But that was long ago. Now we are forgotten. We were abandoned by everyone, left to fend for ourselves. You are the first outsider to visit in many years." Daniel felt a pang of guilt. "I didn't know. Who are you?" The woman stepped forward, her movements graceful and fluid, as if she were one with the planet itself. "I am Elder Suvara, the leader of the Kalorians. We are the last of our kind." Daniel's mind raced as he tried to process what he was hearing. "Why were you abandoned? What happened?" Suvara's eyes grew distant, as though lost in memories. "Our resources were depleted. We were once a thriving people, a center of knowledge and technology. But as time passed, others grew greedy. They took what they wanted from us, leaving us with nothing. When our world began to crumble, no one came to help. Eventually, they simply forgot about us." Daniel was stunned. He had heard of lost civilizations before, but this was different. The Kalorians had been powerful once, part of an alliance that spanned across galaxies. Now they were alone, their cities fading away into ruins. It didn't make sense. How could a once great civilization be left to vanish without a trace? Suvara's voice broke through his thoughts. "We have learned to survive, but it is difficult. The scavengers come now, raiding what little remains. They know we are weak and alone, but we have no one left to turn to." Daniel's heart sank. He could see the sorrow in Suvara's eyes, but there was also a quiet strength there, a determination. She wasn't giving up, even after everything her people had endured. And somehow, Daniel knew that he couldn't just walk away from this. "I can help," Daniel said without thinking. "I don't know how, but I can't leave you like this." Suvara looked at him, a flicker of hope in her eyes. "You are human," she said softly. "Why would you help us?" Daniel didn't have an answer for her, at least not one that made sense. It wasn't about his mission anymore. It wasn't about charting unknown worlds or finding hidden treasures. It was about doing what was right. "I don't know, but I'll try." Suvara nodded slowly. "You are a rare one, Captain Reyes. But even your people cannot fight the galaxy alone. What will you do when the raiders come again?" Daniel looked out at the horizon, the setting sun casting long shadows across the ruined city. He didn't know yet, but one thing was certain. He couldn't stand by while the Kalorians, a once great civilization, were left to fade into nothing. The fight to protect them was just beginning. The trip back to Earth was quiet, and Daniel found himself lost in thought. The images of the Kalorians, Elder Suvara's solemn eyes, the crumbling cities, the silent desperation in the air, stayed with him. He couldn't stop thinking about what he had seen. How could a whole civilization, once powerful and respected, be forgotten so easily? He couldn't understand it. But one thing was clear: the Kalorians needed help. They couldn't survive alone much longer. And Daniel wasn't the kind of man to turn away from a problem that big. When he arrived back at Earth, the atmosphere was different. The planet was buzzing with activity, as it always was, but Daniel's mind wasn't focused on the usual hustle and bustle. His meeting with the Galactic Union had been a failure. They dismissed the Kalorians as insignificant and no longer worth the effort. The Union's leaders didn't care about a forgotten race that had nothing left to offer. Daniel didn't care about what the Union thought. He couldn't just walk away from the Kalorians. So instead of focusing on the cold bureaucracy of the Union, he turned to the people who still cared. The people of Earth. If the Union wouldn't act, then he would. He spent the next several days in the government offices, speaking with people in power and making his case. It wasn't easy. Many saw it as a lost cause, a waste of resources. But Daniel wouldn't back down. He showed them the images he had taken, the video footage of the Kalorians' decaying cities, and the desperation in their eyes. He talked about their rich history, their lost knowledge, and how humanity could be the only hope they had left. His words began to spark something in people. Slowly, more and more agreed to support the cause. They saw the truth in what Daniel was saying, that this wasn't just about saving the Kalorians, but about standing up for what was right. In a world where many civilizations had turned their backs on the Kalorians, humanity had a chance to do something different. Daniel made it clear: if Earth didn't step in, the Kalorians would be wiped out, forgotten forever. The first step was to send aid. Food, medicine, and supplies were gathered quickly. Earth's scientists and engineers began working with Kalorian technology that Daniel had collected, trying to find ways to restore their infrastructure. It wasn't enough to simply give them food. The Kalorians needed their cities rebuilt. They needed protection from the raiders who came regularly. They needed hope. A small fleet of Earth's ships was prepared, ready to head back to Kora. The crew members were not just soldiers or diplomats. They were ordinary people who had been inspired by Daniel's passion. People who wanted to make a difference. Before they departed, Daniel met with Earth's leaders once more. "This is just the beginning," he said. "We are not just sending supplies. We are sending a message to the galaxy. We're not going to let a forgotten people die in silence. The Kalorians deserve more than that." The leaders nodded, some hesitant, others with a glimmer of hope in their eyes. It was a risky move. The galaxy had already forgotten the Kalorians, but maybe that was all the more reason for humanity to step up. The journey to Kora took several weeks, but when the fleet arrived, it was clear that things had already started to change. The Kalorians, though wary at first, greeted the humans with open arms. The supplies they brought were a blessing, but it was the promise of rebuilding that gave the Kalorians a sense of something they hadn't felt in years: hope. Daniel and his team worked alongside the Kalorians, learning from their ancient technology and teaching them modern techniques. The Kalorians were intelligent and capable, but their technology had been neglected for so long that much of it was lost or broken. Together, humans and Kalorians began to rebuild what had once been a mighty civilization. Suvara was cautious at first, her people having been betrayed by so many before. But as the weeks passed, she began to see the sincerity in Daniel's actions. He wasn't just there for the resources or the glory. He was there because he believed that the Kalorians deserved a second chance. It wasn't just about rebuilding their cities. It was about rebuilding their pride. As the days passed, the Kalorians found themselves coming together in a way they hadn't in centuries. They began to remember who they were, what they had lost, and what they could regain. The people of Earth who had come to help were showing them that they were not alone. That message spread throughout Kora like wildfire. Daniel stood with Suvara one evening as the sun set over the new city center. The old ruins were still visible in the distance, but now, in their place, new buildings began to rise, strong and resilient. "This is just the start," Daniel said quietly. Suvara nodded, her eyes reflecting the setting sun. "It is, but for the first time in a long while, I believe we might have a future." Daniel looked out over the city, his heart swelling with pride. He had made a promise to the Kalorians, and he was keeping it. He wasn't sure what the future would hold, but he knew one thing. Humanity had made a difference, and that was something no one could ever forget. Months passed, and the efforts to rebuild Kora continued. The collaboration between humans and Kalorians blossomed into something neither side had expected. The human engineers worked alongside Kalorian scientists, sharing their knowledge and skills. In return, the Kalorians taught the humans their ancient ways, showing them how to live in harmony with the planet's ecosystems. There was a sense of unity and purpose that had not existed for a long time, and Daniel couldn't help but feel proud of the progress. But despite the visible changes and the new hope in the air, there were still challenges. The planet was far from being fully restored, and the raids from the scavengers had not stopped. The humans had built defenses around the new cities, but there were whispers that the worst was yet to come. The raiders, some say, were only a small part of a much bigger threat, one that no one had seen coming. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Daniel met with Suvara and a few other Kalorian leaders. They gathered around a large stone table in a meeting room at the heart of the new city. The air was thick with concern. Suvara's face was grim, her once bright eyes now clouded with doubt. "What's wrong?" Daniel asked, sitting down beside her. Suvara hesitated for a moment before speaking. "There are rumors of a larger force, one that controls the scavengers. We thought they were just groups of pirates looking to take what little we have left. But it seems they are part of something bigger." Daniel leaned forward, his attention sharp. "A larger force. Who are they?" "We don't know," Suvara said, her voice tinged with worry. "But they are well organized and well funded. They've been raiding planets across the galaxy, stripping them of their resources. Kora is just one of many they've targeted. They knew we were weak. They knew no one would come to our aid." Daniel's stomach sank. It was one thing to fight off raiders, but a well-coordinated military force was something else entirely. He had always known that protecting the Kalorians would be a challenge, but he hadn't expected this. The situation was far more dangerous than he had imagined. "What can we do?" Daniel asked. Suvara looked at him, her gaze steady but filled with an underlying fear. "We need more help. We need reinforcements, and we need to strike back before it's too late. But there's a problem. The Galactic Union won't help. They've already turned their backs on us." Daniel clenched his fists. He had known the Union wasn't going to help, but hearing it confirmed hurt. The Union was a powerful force, but they were unwilling to act. The Kalorians were seen as nothing more than a forgotten relic of the past, and now, it seemed, the galaxy's indifference would be their undoing. "We can't fight this alone," Daniel said quietly, "but we won't just sit by and wait for them to destroy everything we've built." Suvara nodded slowly. "What do you suggest, Captain Reyes?" Daniel stood up, looking around the room at the other leaders. We need to reach out to the rest of the galaxy. We need to show them that if they let the Kalorians fall, it will be their loss too. If we stand together, we can stop this threat before it spreads any further. Suvera seemed to consider his words carefully. It may not be easy. The galaxy has grown cold, and many have forgotten what it means to help one another. But perhaps you are right. We cannot let this shadow rise without a fight. Daniel turned to face her, determination in his eyes. We'll find a way. Earth will stand with you. I'll make sure of it. The next few days were filled with planning and strategizing. Daniel and the Kalorians worked together to gather information about this new enemy. They scoured the planet's ancient archives, searching for any clues that might give them an advantage. The Kalorians had once been a powerful force, and their knowledge, though fragmented, could be their key to survival. As the days passed, more and more humans arrived to assist in the effort. News of Earth's commitment to protecting the Kalorians spread across the galaxy, and there were whispers of other civilizations taking notice. Some offered to help, while others turned away. The response was mixed, but Daniel wasn't concerned with the doubters. He focused on those who had answered the call for help. The first step was to strengthen the defenses around the new cities. Daniel had a team of soldiers and engineers work alongside the Kalorians to build an impenetrable barrier, using a combination of Earth's technology and Kylorian resources. The work was grueling, but it was necessary. They knew that the enemy was getting closer. One evening, as Daniel stood on a balcony overlooking the construction site, Suvera joined him. "It's strange," she said softly. "I never thought we would be here, fighting to protect what was once ours." Daniel turned to her, his expression serious. "You've been through a lot, but now you have something worth protecting. We all do." Suvera smiled faintly. "Perhaps, but I can't help but wonder, if we had stood together in the past, would it have been different?" Daniel looked out at the horizon, the sky painted in shades of orange and purple. "Maybe, but we can't change what happened. All we can do is fight for the future." As the night fell, Daniel knew that the coming battle would test everything they had built. It would be a fight for survival, not just for the Kalorians, but for all those who believed in the strength of unity, and he was ready to lead the charge. The days grew heavier as the threat of the unknown enemy loomed closer. Daniel knew that the defense of Kora wouldn't be won by strength alone. They needed more allies, and they needed them fast. With the fate of a once proud civilization hanging in the balance, Daniel set out to do what he had done best: make others see the importance of what was at stake. He sent messages across the galaxy, reaching out to old contacts and calling in favors from anyone who might be willing to lend a hand. It wasn't an easy task. Many civilizations had grown too comfortable, too self-centered. The larger powers in the galaxy, the ones who could make a real difference, were indifferent to the plight of a forgotten race. But Daniel was determined. If he couldn't get the Union to help, then he would find others who could. He began with the United Colonies of Earth, UCE, a powerful network of planets scattered across several star systems. Though the UCE had its own struggles, Daniel had served with many of its leaders during past missions. They knew him, and they respected his ability to get things done. After a long day of sending out messages and making calls, Daniel received a response. The UCE was willing to listen, but they had their own concerns. They needed to know what Earth's government was willing to commit to before they could make a final decision. It was a typical negotiation. A slow, careful dance, but at least it was a step in the right direction. Meanwhile, back on Kora, things were growing more urgent. The raiders, or what seemed to be a coordinated force of pirates, had been spotted on the outskirts of the Kylorian territory again. They were getting bolder, and the humans and Kalorians both knew that the enemy would soon arrive in full force. Daniel's team worked day and night to shore up the defenses, and Suvera led her people in the construction of fortified walls and hidden escape routes. But even with all the preparations, there was a lingering fear in the air. The Kalorians had fought battles before, but they had never faced an enemy with this kind of organization. They didn't have the resources to fend off a large military force. The time for waiting was over. Daniel knew that no one could stand alone in this battle. He needed to rally the galaxy, not just Earth's allies, but anyone willing to stand up against an empire of destruction. The only way they would survive was if the entire galaxy knew that if Kora fell, the enemy would not stop there. They would spread their darkness to other worlds. In the days that followed, Daniel sent out a second message, this time to the Galactic Council. He had already failed once to gain their support, but now, with the threat so close to home, he had no choice but to try again. He knew the Council would resist, but he had a plan. Daniel appealed to their sense of duty. He reminded them of the promises the Council had made when they first came together. The Council was built on unity, on the idea that no civilization should be left to wither away. If the galaxy stood by and let this happen, it would be the first sign of their failure. If they didn't act now, it would be too late to stop the spread of destruction. For the first time in months, the message Daniel sent didn't go unheard. The Council's response was slow but meaningful. Some members who had previously dismissed the Kalorians as insignificant began to understand the larger implications of the threat. They saw what was at stake, and while some remained silent, a few powerful voices in the Council began to speak up in support of Daniel's call for action. The UCE was also starting to mobilize. The message had spread quickly, and Daniel's tireless work was paying off. Ships were being readied, and small battalions of soldiers were gathering. The question now wasn't whether Earth's allies would help. It was how quickly they could get there. But even with all the efforts, Daniel knew time was running out. The enemy wouldn't wait for reinforcements. The first wave of their attack was fast approaching. One evening, as Daniel stood on the balcony overlooking the sprawling city below, Suvara joined him once again. The light of the setting sun painted the sky in warm hues, but there was no mistaking the tension in the air. "You've done all you can, Captain," Suvara said softly, her voice carrying the weight of the days they had spent together. "But even with all the support you've gathered, I fear we are still not prepared for what's coming." Daniel turned to face her. "We're as ready as we'll ever be, and we have to believe that the galaxy will answer. Not just for us, but for everyone." Suvara nodded, though doubt lingered in her eyes. "Do you truly think they will? After everything that's happened?" Daniel placed a hand on her shoulder. "We can't control the past, but we can shape the future. And we won't let them fall without a fight." The first signs of the enemy appeared in the distance days later. Ships, large and menacing, darkened the skies of Kora. Daniel could see them from the command center, and his heart sank. The battle had begun. They were coming. But something had changed. The Kylorians were no longer just survivors. They were warriors once again. The humans had inspired them to believe in their future, and now they would fight to protect it. With Earth's support and the promise of reinforcements, they had a chance. As Daniel looked out at the approaching enemy, he didn't see an overwhelming force. He saw a challenge that he, along with his allies, was ready to face. This was no longer about saving a forgotten people. It was about proving to the galaxy that humanity stood for something bigger than itself, that Earth would always stand for the powerless, for those who needed protection the most. The call had been made. Now it was time to answer it. The tension on Kora was thick as the enemy fleet loomed closer, their ships like dark shadows against the bright sky. The countdown had begun, and everyone knew what was at stake. Daniel stood in the command center, his eyes fixed on the monitors showing the approaching ships. His heart raced. He had spent months building alliances, gathering forces, and preparing the planet for this moment. Now it was time for the first test. Would their preparation be enough? "We have to move fast," Daniel said, his voice steady but firm. He turned to the group of officers and Kylorian leaders gathered around the table. "The enemy is here, and we don't have much time to prepare." Suvara, standing next to him, glanced at the screens with a sense of urgency. "We've fortified the cities as best as we can, but we don't know what their full capabilities are. If they use their full strength, we'll be in trouble." Daniel nodded. "We're counting on our allies arriving soon, but until then, we fight with everything we have. Kora has been forgotten by the galaxy for too long. We won't let it fall." As the preparations continued, Daniel couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. The humans and Kolorians had come together in a way no one had expected. The Kolorians, once a peaceful race focused on knowledge and nature, were now learning the art of war. They had trained alongside humans, studying combat strategies, building their own weapons, and fortifying their homes. In the face of this danger, they had found a strength they hadn't known they had. The first wave of enemy ships arrived, darkening the sky with their sheer numbers. The command center's alarms blared, and everyone scrambled to their positions. The battle was about to begin. Daniel's voice rang out, cutting through the chaos. "Activate the defenses. Move out." Kylorian soldiers and human volunteers alike rushed to their posts, preparing for the oncoming battle. The hum of energy shields, the clanking of armor, and the whir of weaponry filled the air as the soldiers made their final preparations. Suvera joined Daniel at the front, her face determined. "We have a plan, but we need to be quick. The enemy's main force will be here in an hour." Daniel nodded. "We'll hold them off until the reinforcements arrive. We can't let them take this planet." As the enemy's fleet continued to approach, the first wave of attackers began their descent. The ships deployed hundreds of smaller attack craft, sending them to strike the outer defenses. Daniel watched in tense silence as the first explosions lit up the sky. The Kylorian defenses were holding, just barely. The energy shields flickered as they absorbed the brunt of the blasts, but they were already showing signs of weakening. "We need to take out their smaller ships first," Daniel said, pointing at the displays. "Focus fire on the ones trying to breach our outer defenses." The human and Kylorian forces responded in unison, firing their weapons at the enemy ships with precision. The air crackled with energy as the blasts collided with the incoming attackers. Some ships were destroyed in midair, their fiery remains falling to the ground. Others managed to break through the defenses, causing damage to the city walls, but the combined forces of humans and Kylorians fought back fiercely. Suvera stood by Daniel's side, her eyes scanning the battlefield. "We're holding them off, but it won't last long. We need more firepower." Just as she spoke, a signal came through the communication channels. The reinforcements had arrived. Daniel's heart lifted. This is it. Earth's fleet is here. In the distance, a new set of ships appeared, sleek, powerful warships, flying in formation. The UCE had kept its word. Daniel watched as the ships launched a barrage of laser fire at the enemy fleet, breaking through their defenses and creating a path for the defenders on the ground. The humans and Kylorians cheered as the reinforcements entered the battle, but the fight was far from over. The enemy wasn't backing down. They were more determined than ever. Daniel's voice rang out over the comms. "Stay focused. We've got them on the run, but we need to finish this." With renewed strength, the defenders fought harder. The UCE's fleet joined in the assault, providing support from above, while the combined ground forces fought to push the invaders back. Daniel led a small unit of soldiers and Kylorians through the battle lines, taking out enemy positions and clearing the way for more reinforcements. Despite the strength of the Allied forces, the battle was brutal. Explosions rocked the ground, and the air was thick with the sounds of weapons fire. But Daniel remained focused, refusing to let the fear take over. He was leading a charge not just for the survival of Kora, but for the survival of a hope that no one, no civilization, should ever be forgotten. As the hours passed, the enemy began to retreat, their ships falling back into the sky. The battle was not yet over, but the tide had turned. The invaders had underestimated the strength of those who were willing to fight for something greater than themselves. Daniel stood at the front, watching as the last of the enemy ships retreated. His heart pounded with exhaustion, but there was a sense of victory in the air. The battle for Kora had been won. For now. Suvara walked up to him, her face tired but filled with gratitude. We did it. We held them off. Daniel nodded, though he knew this was only the beginning. This is just the first battle. The enemy will be back, but we'll be ready. Looking around, Daniel could see the faces of the soldiers and civilians who had fought beside him. Humans and Kalorians standing together. A bond had been forged in the fires of war, and it was stronger than any force the enemy could throw at them. And as the dust began to settle on the battlefield, Daniel knew one thing for sure. Earth would never abandon Kora again. The battle had been long, and the aftermath was filled with both victory and loss. As the smoke cleared, Daniel stood among the ruins, surveying the damage. The ground was littered with debris from destroyed ships, shattered shields, and fallen soldiers. The sky, once dark with the shadow of the enemy's fleet, was now clear, but the quiet that followed the battle felt heavy, a reminder that the war was far from over. Despite the heavy toll, there was a sense of triumph in the air. The invaders had been driven back, and for the moment, Kora had been saved. But Daniel knew that the enemy would return. This was only a temporary victory. The question now was what they would do with this time. Suvara approached, her face serious but resolute. She had been by Daniel's side throughout the entire battle, coordinating with the Kylorian commanders and helping to lead the charge. Her people had fought bravely, and though many had fallen, the spirit of Kora had not been broken. We've bought ourselves some time, Suvara said, looking out over the battlefield. But we can't afford to relax. The enemy will regroup. We need to prepare for the next wave. Daniel nodded, his expression hardening. I know, we can't let our guard down. But this victory, however small, is a sign. We've proven we can stand against them. We can win. But the cost of this victory was evident. Kora's cities were damaged and many of the soldiers, both human and Kylorian, were wounded. The ground forces had fought with everything they had, but the toll had been heavy. The injured were being tended to, and the rebuilding efforts had already begun. But it was clear that they couldn't keep fighting like this for long without more help. As Daniel looked out over the battlefield, he saw the Kylorian civilians, some of whom had once been farmers or scholars, now stepping forward to help the wounded. They weren't just rebuilding their homes, they were rebuilding their lives. The people of Kora had found strength in their unity, and Daniel was beginning to realize that their victory wasn't just about the military. It was about something deeper, a bond between the people of Kora and the humans who had come to their aid. But even as they worked together, the questions lingered. Was it enough? Could Kora ever truly be safe again? The enemy would learn from this battle. They would come back stronger, and Kora might not have the resources to defend itself again. That evening, Daniel met with the leaders of the UCE fleet, who had arrived just in time to turn the tide of the battle. Admiral Rice, a seasoned commander with years of experience in galactic conflicts, sat across from him, her face grim. "You did well, Captain," Admiral Rice said, her voice low but appreciative. "But we both know that this was only the first round. We're not equipped to keep defending Kora with just this small fleet. We need more support, more allies." Daniel leaned forward, his expression serious. "I've already contacted everyone I can. The UCE's involvement is a start, but we need more. The galaxy needs to know that if Kora falls, they're next. No one is safe. If we don't stand together, we'll all fall." The Admiral nodded. "You're right. I'll send the message to the Council. Maybe they'll listen now. But it'll take time to gather a real force." Daniel understood. Time was something they didn't have much of. As much as the UCE had supported them, they were stretched thin. And the Galactic Council, while not hostile, had always been slow to act. The politics of the galaxy had a way of getting in the way of real action. But now, after seeing Kora's defiance, maybe they would change their tune. Days passed, and the atmosphere on Kora remained tense. The people worked hard to rebuild, but there was an underlying fear that never seemed to go away. Would the enemy strike again before reinforcements could arrive? Would they be strong enough to repel another assault? Daniel did his best to keep morale high, speaking with soldiers, reassuring the civilians, and making sure the leaders were all on the same page. The Korans, though exhausted, remained united. They were a people who had always believed in peace, but now they had learned the strength of their will. They wouldn't allow their planet to fall without a fight. Then, one morning, the message came. The Galactic Council had finally acted. They had begun sending reinforcements, ships, supplies, and more soldiers, along with a fleet of medical teams to help tend to the wounded. It wasn't a large force, but it was a start. Daniel's heart lifted as he read the message. This was the glimmer of hope they had needed. The galaxy was beginning to respond, and though it was far from enough, it was a sign that Kora was not as alone as it had once been. That evening, as the sun set on the peaceful hills of Kora, Daniel stood with Suvara once again, watching the sky. It was a quiet moment, but it felt like the calm before the storm. "We have a chance," Daniel said softly, his voice filled with a quiet resolve. "The reinforcements are on their way, and we're not alone anymore. We're not fighting just for Kora. We're fighting for all the worlds that might be next." Suvara's eyes met his. "We will fight for them, and we will win." As the stars began to twinkle above them, Daniel knew that the war was far from over. But for the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope. The people of Kora were strong, the reinforcements were coming, and the galaxy was beginning to take notice. Kora's fight had only just begun, but it had already proven something that would resonate across the galaxy. If humanity and its allies stood together, nothing could break them. Weeks passed after the arrival of the reinforcements, and the mood on Kora shifted. The threat that once loomed over the planet no longer felt so inevitable. There was still tension, of course. There always would be while the war raged on. But the people of Kora had something they hadn't had in a long time: hope. The UCE fleet had sent several more ships to help, and with the assistance of Kora's military, they fortified the planet's defenses. The new alliances formed in those weeks were built on the blood, sweat, and tears of all those who had fought beside one another. The bonds between humans and Korans were stronger than ever, their combined strength a symbol of defiance against the enemy. Daniel stood on the balcony of the command center, looking out at the stars. The night was quiet, a calm so deep it felt like the universe itself was holding its breath. After the battle, after all the struggles, it was hard to believe that there was still peace on the horizon. But somehow, it felt like they were moving toward something better. He wasn't alone. Suvara joined him, her presence both comforting and familiar. She had become his closest ally, but over time, their partnership had grown into something more. They had fought side by side, saved each other's lives countless times, and seen things that would change them both forever. Their bond was unspoken but undeniable. "How long do you think we have?" Suvara asked, looking up at the stars. Her voice was calm, but Daniel could hear the undercurrent of concern in it. "I don't know," Daniel replied, his gaze fixed on the vastness of space. "I think we've bought ourselves some time, but the enemy isn't going to disappear. We'll have to stay vigilant. We're not out of danger yet." Suvara nodded, her eyes narrowing as if thinking of something far away. "But we've made them notice us. We've shown them that we can stand together. And that's more than anyone thought possible." Daniel smiled slightly, the weight of their shared struggle settling into him. It wasn't just about surviving. It was about fighting for something bigger than themselves. They were fighting for the future of Kora and all the other worlds that had been abandoned by the galaxy. "But will it be enough?" Daniel asked quietly. "The enemy is strong, and we're not sure how long the Galactic Council will continue to help. It could all fall apart if we aren't careful." Suvara's expression softened, and she placed a hand on his shoulder. "We can't afford to think like that. We have to believe that together, We can do more than just survive. We can thrive. The galaxy is watching, and we can make them see that we're worth saving." The words rang true in Daniel's heart. They had already proven their strength. They had come together in the face of impossible odds and turned the tide of battle. Now it was up to them to ensure that the fight didn't end in vain. The following days were spent preparing for the next phase of the war. While Kelora's defenses were stronger than ever, there was still much to be done. They needed more ships, more resources, and most importantly, more allies. Daniel had sent out calls for help across the galaxy, hoping that the other civilizations would hear their plea and respond. Then, finally, the news came. Several more factions had answered the call. The galaxy, it seemed, was beginning to understand the importance of this war. They couldn't afford to let Kelora fall. The enemy that threatened them wasn't just a threat to one planet. It was a threat to all of them. As the reinforcements arrived, Daniel felt a new sense of purpose. This wasn't just about one battle. This was about the survival of civilizations across the galaxy. And if they stood together, they might just have a chance. Kelora was no longer alone. They had allies, true allies, by their side. And though the road ahead would be long and filled with challenges, Daniel knew that the people of Kelora weren't just fighting to survive anymore. They were fighting to win. The day came when the next major assault was launched. The combined forces of the UCE, Kelora, and their new allies stood together, ready for whatever the enemy threw at them. The enemy fleet approached, massive and intimidating, but they were no longer the unstoppable force they once were. This time, Kelora had its defenders. The tide had turned. The battle was fierce, but this time, there was no panic. There was no fear. The soldiers of Kelora, supported by their human allies, fought with a unity that could not be broken. The enemy's attacks were met with a fierce resistance. Every blow they struck was returned tenfold. The combined might of the galaxy's united forces proved to be more than the invaders could handle. By the time the battle ended, the enemy fleet had been defeated. The invaders were forced to retreat, and the people of Kelora stood victorious once again. Daniel looked over the battlefield, his heart swelling with pride. They had done it. The people of Kelora were safe, at least for now. And they had something that no enemy could take away: hope. As Suvar approached him, her face lit with the glow of victory, Daniel smiled. "We did it," he said simply. "Yes, we did," Suvar replied. "But this is just the beginning." Together, they stood side by side, knowing that the future was uncertain but confident that, no matter what came next, they would face it together. And no matter how many battles lay ahead, the galaxy would never forget the lesson they had learned. When humanity and its allies stood together, they were unstoppable. And for the first time in a long while, the future didn't look so bleak after all.